Well, in this video, I want to talk about, and let us to think through, the temptations of Jesus, right? The temptations of Jesus. And I want you to just keep an open mind, Well, he's tempted in the wilderness, isn't he? And what is he tempted by? Well, Satan or somebody is telling him, trying to tempt him to jump off something, jump off a cliff, Go on, Jesus, like when you're 16, your mates say, go on, jump off that cliff. Go on, 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 jump off the cliff. If there's a God, he'll save you and all that. And of course, Jesus replies, I'm not testing God, It's surprising how many people do test God and survive. It's a fact people do jump off and do all sorts of things, try and commit suicide, and they actually do survive. So he's not interested in doing that. He doesn't want to break his neck. He doesn't want. He's not stupid. He doesn't want to. Well, he's alone there in the desert. It's a lot to do with common sense here, really, isn't it? Of course, how old is he? He's about 30. He should know better than to be jumping off cliffs. He's not 16. He's not on a dare with his mates. So he's, I would just ignore it. Somebody said that to me, jump off it. I just ignore it. I don't do stupid things like that. Anyway, so we've got the temptation of. Apparently, he's tempted to be Lord, and he can own everything in the world. And if you will just bow down to worship me, say, I'm Satan, worship me, and you can have everything in the world and everything. Now the question is, did Jesus want everything in the world? Because, look at it as a father and son. How many fathers have a son who doesn't want to be involved in the family business? It's very, very common. Dad, I don't want to rule the world. I know you're ruling the world and you want me to sit at your right hand and rule the world with you, but I don't want to do that. I actually want to go to art college. I don't want to go to university. I want to become a potter. I want to become a rock star. I have a talent for music. And it might be that Jesus didn't want to rule the world. He didn't want everything in the world. Not everybody does. There is an assumption here in the Gospels that every man would want to be ruling the world and to have everything that he could possibly have. He wants Mercedes. He wants his own aeroplane. He wants all the women he can have. He wants everything. But there's an awful lot of men who don't want that. There's an awful lot of men who don't want that. No, I don't want that. I just like a peaceful life. I just want to do my painting. I want to do my pottery. I don't want to be ruling the world. If God wants, he wants me to do it, but I don't want to do it. It's no temptation if you don't want to do it. Temptation is all about being tempted by something that you want, right? But you shouldn't be having for any number of reasons. Like, if you're overweight and you're tempted by a carrot cake and you mustn't be eating carrot cake because you're overweight, then that is temptation. But you're not going to be tempted by a carrot. Have a piece of carrot, go on. Be tempted by a piece of carrot. Be tempted by a piece of raw celery. It's not going to happen if you like your food. So I don't know if that is such a great temptation. If you're not into power, then owning the world, being in charge of the world, having all of these things might not be a temptation if you're not that type of person. Equally, if you're very practically minded and sensible, you're not going to be going jumping off cliffs and things. It's sort of like, well, I'm not going to do anything stupid like that. I've got more sense than that. You don't even need to quote anything from the Bible. You just say, I'm not so stupid as to do a daft thing like that. Why would it's like, go away. Just walk away. I wouldn't even bother replying to him. I just, well, that's a stupid thing. And it's almost like he's trying to egg on Jesus to sort of like, can he wind him up to get him to show off that he can do magic. Well, not everybody's like that. Not everybody feels the need to show off what they can do. A lot of people have a lot of power and can do a lot of great things, but they don't feel the need to show off. And if somebody provokes them, they're still not going to show off because they're not that kind of person. And of course, we've got Jesus fasting in the desert. And what's he tempted by? A piece of bread. Well, I'm thinking Yom Kippur. I'm thinking in the Day of Atonement in Shul. And you know what from Jews going to be tempted by a piece of bread? A piece of bread? Do you want a piece of bread? 2:00 in the afternoon? Pickle meat, yeah. Pickle meat. Hamish a cucumber, mustard. Some borscht. A bagel with cream cheese and smoked salmon. Now that's temptation. That's temptation, a bagel with smoked salmon. Ooh, lovely, lovely, lovely. Saveloys and chips. And mustard. Kosher mustard and cucumber. Oh. That's temptation. That is temptation. That is temptation on Yom Kippur. But a dry piece of bread. I don't want a dry piece of bread on Yom Kippur. Like people are sitting in shul thinking about dry pieces of bread. Is that what they're thinking about? Oh, I can't wait when the Yom Kippur's over and I can go home and have a nice piece of bread. What I think, what, that's no temptation. That is no temptation. Useless. He's useless, isn't he? He's useless. And it's interesting how Jesus is not sexually tempted. I mean, really, this person who's in the desert supposed to be tempting him isn't doing a very good job of it. I mean, really, as we all know from the Bible, and we know from life and politics, how to tempt a man is a pretty young, hot thing. That's the way you tempt a man, a virile man of 30. A virile man of 30, alone in the desert and nobody's looking. Some nice hot thing. You see, that is the downfall of most great men. We're thinking Samson and Delilah. If you want to, cause trouble, it's the women. Sex is, if God is, if there's only going to be trouble in the Hebrew Bible for a man, it's going to come from a woman. The woman, you think of Joseph and the woman and she's making eyes at him and and he ends up in prison. It's the woman, isn't it? You think of King David and he's got his eyes on a woman. She's probably giving him the eye as well, because she'll be giving him the eye because that's the way it works. She's up for it. She's giving him the eye back and he makes his move, but she's already married. It's always the women. And quite honestly, if you're going to test Jesus, the way to do it is with a woman. A really sexy, hot thing. Of course, we don't get that in the Gospels, do we? We don't get him being tempted by a woman. And of course, he's coming into contact with prostitutes, isn't he? But of course, they're not making any move on him. I don't know how to love him. I don't know how to love him. This is Mary. Is it Mary Magdalene, the prostitute? If she doesn't know how to love him, what woman does? I mean, she's a prostitute, for heaven's sakes. If she doesn't know how to please him. I mean, you are a prostitute. You know how to please a man. She doesn't know how to please him. Of course she knows how to please him. That's her job. That's what prostitutes and hookers do. They know how to please a man. They know how to give a good blowjob. They know how to do everything. They're doing it. It's their job. If you're working at something and that's your job, you become very proficient and good at it. So prostitutes are very good at what they do. They know how to satisfy a man. And certain prostitutes the men will always go to because they know that she's good. Because she's practiced, she takes pride in her work, like any job. Prostitutes will take a pride in that they can satisfy a man. They see it as doing a good job and they're pleasing a man and they're satisfying him. They're not all sort of like drug addicts, doing it for cocaine. A lot of hookers and that do actually take pride in giving a man real sexual satisfaction, and they actually enjoy it. And women can kind of get off on it and they love the power, and it makes them feel good that they're able to get a man to orgasm and he's just in rapture over what she's able to do and how she does it in the bedroom, you see. But But we're not getting any of this with Jesus. And quite honestly, we know from the Hebrew Bible that the downfall of, all great men, we know from politics, is always sex. Clinton and all the preachers that, what is it? Martin Luther King was, we know he was the one for the women. Yes, he gave great stirring speeches, but he did like his nookie, and he did like women, and he liked sex, and that is his weakness. But apparently we're told, oh no, geez, well, we don't know because he wasn't tested. Was he really there was no test. I mean, that is pretty useless what Satan was doing in the desert. He wasn't really testing him. That is no test. None of those things were really legitimate. Those three things in the desert that supposedly were testing Jesus was no test. A bit of dry bread. Who's got a bit of dry bread? Who wants a bit of dry bread? Jump off the cliff. I'm not so stupid. I don't want a broken neck. I'm not going to jump off the cliff. And as for ruling the world and I can have everything in the world, well, I don't want everything in the world. I just want a quiet life. I'm happy being a carpenter. I just want to get married, have some children. I don't want the responsibility of ruling the world. Why would I want to sit at God's right hand? I don't want to do it. It's worry, because it's a lot of responsibility. I don't want a yacht. I don't want millions of pounds, you see. So what is Satan going to tempt somebody like this with? Right. The thing is about temptation is, I know I was an evangelical Christian for 42 years. Christian men are the easiest men to bed. I would say, from my experience, a evangelical Christian man will be easier for me to bed when I was a younger woman than an Orthodox Jew. And I think the reason is there's so much emphasis on sex, on not doing it, and on don't give way to the desires of the flesh. And, it's like, because they're going on and on and on about it, Christians are so focused, and they used to be so focused on the flesh, and lust, and flesh, and lust. It's terrible, because it's like trying to not eat too much carrot cake, trying to stop eating carrot cake because you have to watch your weight. And all people are talking about and all you're reading about is carrot cake. Carrot cake. You mustn't give way to carrot cake. You mustn't give way to carrot cake. And it's almost, they're going on about the carrot cake so much. And you think, well, if you could just shut up about this carrot cake, I could think about something else. But whenever I go to church, you're talking about carrot cake. And you're making matters worse because I'm craving the carrot cake more because you're going on and on and on about the carrot cake. And I've got high cholesterol and I've got to cut down my cholesterol, but you keep going on about the carrot cake. Don't give in to the carrot cake. Don't give in to the carrot cake. Don't give in to the lust of the flesh of the carrot cake. And the very nature of going on and on and on about it will make you want it more, because this is the way it works. Because I do remember in my younger days trying to diet, and when you're trying to resist things, it's so much harder. When you make your mind up not to eat something, that's when it gets worse. It's like, if you're not bothered about having chocolate, then there's no big deal. It's when you say you can't have chocolate, and then you want the chocolate. It's like if somebody could say to you, you are not to eat celery. And if people kept saying, don't eat celery, the human being would say, I've got to have some celery. So maybe it's the fact to do with you mustn't do it, rather than the thing itself. It's the fact that you're told you mustn't do it, so the human being wants to do it because they've been told they mustn't do it. It's like mummy saying, don't do that to a toddler, and the child will go and do it. But if the mother said it's all right to do that, the child probably wouldn't be interested in doing it. It's because mummy said don't do it that they suddenly want to do it. And I don't think the Gospels do demonstrate Jesus' ability to resist temptation. I don't think he has been tempted like all men. And this is what they're trying to tell you. He has been tempted like any other man. He hasn't been tempted like any other man. He hasn't. Has he had a really hot young chick putting her hands up her leg and him getting an erection and nobody being around? and she's on, and she's more and more and more. And then her hand goes on his penis, and it's erect. Are we, has he been tempted like that? And I'm being quite serious. I'm not trying to be blasphemous or shocking. I'm being quite serious, because this is what it boils down to. Because this is what Christianity is asking of people. Because they're so focused on the flesh. Don't give way to masturbation. Don't give way to the flesh. Don't give way to the desires of the flesh. Right. But the Gospels do not demonstrate or show he has resisted the flesh. He hasn't resisted the flesh like other men. No. He hasn't been married and been tempted into adultery. He hasn't been tempted by adultery. So that's something else. What's he got in common with a married man who's been tempted by the commandment, one of the 10 commandments, do not commit adultery? Jesus hasn't had that, has he? What has he got in common with a married man who's been tempted to commit adultery? What does Jesus know about sexual temptation? Well, from the Gospels, nothing. There is nothing there to suggest that he has been tempted. And I would expect even a hint of it, because it's very evident in the Hebrew Bible with stories of Joseph and, in Egypt and so and so, and we've got Samson and Delilah, we've got David giving the eye to, so and so's wife. We've got all the hanky panky going on in the Hebrew Bible, because we don't get the hanky panky in the New Testament. Nothing. Everybody doesn't do. Nobody. There's no hanky panky. Nothing in the New Testament. There is nobody who's doing it. There's nobody who's tempted by it. There's nobody who's giving way by it. We're not having Jesus wrestling with trying to resist sexual temptation. The only thing we're getting him trying to resist is running away from his destiny of having to be crucified. So he believes he's meant to die. This is how the story goes. And of course, he doesn't want to be crucified on a cross, because he doesn't want to be in pain and agony. So, which is understandable. Who wants to be in pain and agony? Who wants to die a horrible death? And he doesn't want it. And he has the option. This is what it's about. It's about Jesus having a choice. You don't have to suffer. And he's chosen, yes, I will suffer. It's a bit like saying, oh, you don't have to be beheaded. You don't, you can choose. And he's choosing to do it. It's like, I'm choosing to go to Auschwitz. I'm choosing to be this, and this is the great example. And aren't I a great person? I'm choosing to go to Auschwitz. I'm choosing to go to Auschwitz. Well, no, I was seeking to escape Auschwitz. And you also get this thing with the nun, the nun Edith, the Jewish nun, how she's going to die with her Jewish people in Auschwitz. She's quite happy to go to Auschwitz and die with her people. Well, she's stupid. Well, that's stupid, Seichel. Who wants to die in Auschwitz? You escape. You're seeking to escape from Auschwitz, not go to Auschwitz. But this is what the typical Christians, they love this, don't they? Oh, and I'm going to glorify God by dying in Auschwitz. Oh, and it's all vanity. It's all attention seeking. I'm the nun. I'm the Jewish nun dying in Auschwitz, and everybody's going to say how wonderful I was, that I chose to die with my own people there in Auschwitz. When she hadn't got the seichel to stay away from Auschwitz. Don't go to Auschwitz. Get off the train if you can, which is what an awful lot of people were trying to do, was get off the train. No, she's apparently wanting to go to Auschwitz. This is so offensive. This is so obscene. I am wanting to die for God, when God would say, I want you to live, try and escape, try and arrange to get other people to escape. It's just a perverse theology. It's a perverse way. It's a very perverse way at looking at life. And you have to remember that Jesus died outside the temple. God had the sacrificial system within the temple, and the sacrifices were animal sacrifices. There was grain offerings and things like that, but human sacrifice is forbidden in Judaism. It's forbidden in Judaism. God wanted the Jewish people to stand out above all the other nations. Don't do what the other nations do. Don't sacrifice your children. Don't sacrifice anybody. Right? So the very nature of this belief of God dying to redeem his people is an obscenity and is a contradiction of his own laws, because God said, don't do that. This is what the other nations are doing, sacrificing, making sacrifices in order to try and please the gods. Right? This is what the nations around Israel were doing. And God was saying, no, don't be like these people. You do not sacrifice anybody for anything. And God had it all arranged with the temple for the sacrificial offerings. He had it all outlined. It was all detailed in Torah. But the main point of this video is I don't believe that the New Testament demonstrates at all in any way that Jesus was tempted any way like any other human being. Nor does he understand suffering. He doesn't understand suffering. The thing is, the people who understand temptation best are the people that have given way to it. Not the people that have been tempted by temptation. It's the people that have given way to temptation. I do remember Jack Nicholson, the actor, talking with another actor. Now, what had happened with this other actor, this young man, he'd gone off the rails, he'd done all sorts of crazy things in public, drinking, he's all sorts of things. He'd made an arse of himself public, he did lots of stupid things. And Jack Nicholson, the actor, spoke with him. And he said to this young man, I have done all that you have done. And I understand exactly where you're coming from, because I have done it. And he befriended this young man, this young Hollywood up-and-coming star. And he said, I've done it. I've done it. And he was able to help this young man because he had actually done it himself. And really, the best people are those who can say, I've done it. You know, you committed adultery with your wife. I did it. I did it. So you can tell me. And I do understand because I've done it. The people who best understand your predicament are people who have been actually in it. The people who've actually been on drugs are the people who can understand you when you're a drug addict. The people who are being alcoholics can understand you, the alcoholic. You know, the people that have done despicable things in their life are the ones that can understand other people who have done despicable things in their life. And they are the people that can relate to each other best, because it's so reassuring when you said or do something wrong and somebody says to you, do you know, I did exactly the same thing once. And it's like, it's such a relief because you feel understood, and they're not condemning you and they're not judging you. It's like, I've done it too. And they understand you, because the people that can understand you are the people that have actually done it. They've been through it. Not the people that have been tempted to become a drug addict, not have been tempted to drink alcohol, not have been tempted to commit adultery, not have been tempted to steal. It's the people that have actually done it. And they can say, I understand because I have done it. I've been there. And then you can relate and talk with that person. And it's a fantastic feeling. And I think in a way it's quite redemptive. And it's really, really, really helpful. And Jack Nicholson was able to, in his most subtle, wise, experienced way as a man, so experienced of everything in life, he'd been through it all, he's done it all, was able to come alongside this man, young man, who thought it was the end of the world, the end of his life. He's done all these things, he's shamed himself publicly, he feels his life's not worth living, and he could come alongside this young man and say, it's all right. I've just done exactly what you've done. I'm still here. You will survive. You will be able to get on track. You'll be able to have a career. You'll be able to reinvent yourself and make a new life for yourself. This is not the end of the world. And this is so consoling. This is so encouraging. And this is what you want to hear. And this is what is so helpful. And this is when you people say is I have been there, I've done it, I've done what you've just done. And but we don't get that with Jesus. We don't get that. All we're told, he's been tempted by a piece of bread, he's been tempted to jump off a cliff, which is, a stupid thing to do anyway, and he's been tempted that he can have everything in the world, which he possibly doesn't want anyway. He might be happy being a carpenter and just teaching at school in the evenings, for the kids for bar mitzvah. So I don't think Jesus actually has been demonstrated. It hasn't been proven in the Gospels that he has been tempted by any other man. And I don't actually think he would be very sympathetic, because people who resist temptation are, in my experience, I can resist it. I can resist it. The evangelical Christian, of course, they always resist, don't they? I can resist temptation because I'm full of the Holy Spirit. Christ is with me. I'm able to resist everything. You think, boo-hoo to you. They're not going to understand temptation. They are not going to understand temptation because they never give way to it. The only people who are going to understand temptation are those who have given way to it. And they'll say, yeah, I know, I've been there. It is hard. It is there. It is hard. And it doesn't mean they're going to encourage you to do it. They just say, I understand. And it's so wonderful to be understood when somebody says, I know what it's like to fall in love with a married man. I know what it's like. I have been there. I've had an affair and I've done it. I understand where you're coming from. I understand. I was married and I fell truly and deeply with this woman. And I did it. And I understand where you're coming from. And all I can say from my experience is possibly tell you why I regretted it. But I do understand where you're coming from because I've been there. And I think that is the most helpful, because that's what we all want to hear. We don't want to hear people say, oh, you can resist. You can resist. I never get tempted. I get tempted, but I always resist. I'm always resisting cream cakes. I never give way to a cream cake. I never give way to anything. Instead of saying, well, actually I do sometimes, but I don't tell anybody. I tell people I always resist, but actually I don't. Sometimes I do give way. Sometimes I do give way. I can't, it gets the better of me. And this is where I think it's so consoling. And it's like you're trying, but you fall down and you try again. And I do remember knowing one Christian that I met in 42 years who stands out, who I met, was an alcoholic. And he said to me, he would be sober, and then suddenly he'd just lose it for some reason. He didn't know why. He'd just lose it and he'd go on what's called a bender. He'd just go out there and drink and drink and drink and drink and drink. And he would normally find himself literally in the gutter somewhere, sprawled out on the street. And he said it's amazing, but he said that always somebody would come and help him. And he believed this was God helping him. And then he would get back on the straight and narrow again. do very, very well, no drinking. Then blow me, it would happen again. He'd start drinking, go on another bender. Find again somebody else would take pity on him, help him, get sober again. And this was his life. This was his life. And it was a real problem. But I do remember he made a great impression. And I suppose his testimony was really very touching, because you've got here is a very, very weak man who keeps giving way to this, whatever it is, this alcoholic binging. And then he gets rock bottom, and then he picks himself up just very well, and then he's back again. But and what he was doing was praising God, that God was giving him a chance again to go sober again. In other words, he was grateful that somebody came to help him, dragged him out of the gutter, got him on the straight and narrow again, helped him, but then he went in the gutter again, then somebody else came along. And so he used to say, well, God is very good to me, because he's always sending people to help me when I'm on these benders. And he had nothing but praise to God. And it was very, very touching, that testimony, because he realised he was weak. He freely admitted it. He says, I am weak. I am weak. And I'm not able to resist this alcohol. And I don't know why. And it just comes upon me. And that has always stayed with me. And what is so pronounced in that testimony of faith in God is not the alcohol. Is not the temptation. It's the fact that he praises God for helping him, even though he keeps doing wrong again and again and again. But he keeps trying and trying and trying to do better. And what better man to advise and counsel an alcoholic than this? I mean, if you are full of shame over your alcohol, to meet somebody like this, who is struggling, clearly struggling, will probably be very helpful, because I think it would perhaps removes the shame of failing, because it's terrible when you keep trying to improve and you keep failing. And this is something that's not talked about, is you're trying to overcome something, but you just keep failing at it. You keep failing at it. You keep trying to lose the weight. You keep trying to stop this. You keep trying to stop that. And you are trying your very best, and you just keep failing. And there's no magic answer. There is no magic answer. And I think Christianity is not being truthful when it's trying to suggest that there's a magic answer to always overcoming, that you can overcome everything. Because the reality is, what is so often in people's lives, people are struggling to resist and overcome. And sometimes they give way and sometimes they don't. And everybody has their own little thing, whether they're resisting losing their temper, they're resisting overeating, they're resisting laziness, they're trying to, everybody has problems, little things about themselves that they're trying to improve and work on. And it is a life's work, and it's not necessarily always victory. You have the victory in Christ. Well, you could challenge that and say, maybe it's not always good to be victorious. Maybe some Christians need to be, maybe humility can come about and be developed in your character by realizing you're not victorious. You are so not victorious. You are not victorious. You are struggling. And because you're struggling, you identify with the rest of the human race. And this is what I feel now as an ex-Jewish believer in Jesus. I feel more in sync with the human race, because I'm thinking we're all the same and we've all got our own struggles. And the evangelical born-again Christian is not better, and they're not necessarily more victorious than anybody else. There is such a thing as mind over matter, Maybe some people have the capacity for any number of reasons to resist things, and other people can't. And they're giving the impression that the power of God can enable you to resist everything. But another question would be, is it always meant to be, this is a provocative question, is it always meant to be that God would want you to resist the temptation? Might it be in the plan of God that some people, he might want them, or he might permit them, or it might be God's will that they give into that temptation, because he's already trying to change that person. And part of changing that person is to that person to recognize that they are weak, that they're vulnerable just like anybody else, they're not invincible. And perhaps this is where humility really comes into the fore and can develop in a man and woman, where you see, actually, I'm just like everybody else. I am so like everybody else. Yes, I believe in God. Yes, I have faith in God. But really, at the end of the day, I'm just like anybody else. I am struggling with passions and desires, and I'm struggling with certain aspects of myself. And maybe this is a good thing. And maybe God wants you to stay in that position of struggling, because he knows if you don't, you'll become arrogant. And as we know, so many evangelicals are so arrogant. They do think they're so great. They think they're so full of it. They think they're full of the power of God. They think they can overcome everything. They can think they can resist everything. And they make ordinary people feel so inadequate. They make people feel helpless. They give false promises to people that they are able to achieve certain goals and things that they can't. And people feel ashamed and embarrassed, and they're not able to reach these higher levels. And maybe you're not required to reach those higher levels. Maybe God wants some people to stay at a lower level and struggle, because he knows there are some people, when they're too successful, become very, very arrogant. Not everybody can cope with success, not just in being successful in their career, but successful in their righteousness. In other words, sometimes you need to keep to be not successful in order to keep some humility, because success, it's very hard to be humble if you are one of the great singers in the world, or you're one of the great painters in the world. How hard it is to be humble if you are the Pope, or if you're Mother Teresa. How hard is it to be humble when you are a great singer and a dancer like Beyonce? How hard is it to be humble, to be truly humble, when you are praised and adored in the world for your beauty, for your skills and abilities? Obviously, you worked hard to develop them, but it's very hard to be humble. Some people can do it. Some people can be great men and women and successful and yet be very humble, but I don't think I could. I think I'd become very arrogant and I'd become very vain. And I don't believe it's God's will for me to be successful in the world, inverted commas, or to be loved and valued and highly thought of, because I think it would actually make me quite vain. And I might become rather too full of myself. And by not being in that position, I can look at myself in a sober, balanced way and value myself in a balanced way, not thinking too highly of myself, but not thinking too lowly of myself, and recognise that sometimes I can't resist temptation, but sometimes I can. And I'm struggling at the moment with chocolate. I stopped eating chocolate and crisps 8 weeks ago, and for the first 5 weeks there was no problem, but now I'm really struggling. Every night and in the night I'm craving chocolate and crisps, and it's just this urge. I'll have to go to the shops in the daytime and buy some chocolate. I don't think I can cope with not eating chocolate. It's terrible. But for 5 weeks it was not a problem, but now it's a problem. But the reality is I don't want to get diabetes. I'm 60. I've been diagnosed with coronary heart disease. you know, from a purely practical level, it would be stupid to start eating sweets again because I am at a high risk of diabetes. I can't afford to be at risk of diabetes. I actually am putting myself more at risk of an early death if I give way to that temptation and start eating chocolate again, because it's really, really, really difficult. The first 5 weeks was all right, but for some reason, for the last 3 weeks, it's really, really hard. I'm getting this craving. And what is this? Is it's a physical, psychological thing. That's when I used to eat my chocolate, always in the evening and always in the early hours of the morning. I perhaps couldn't sleep, and at 2 o'clock I'd have a piece of Turkish delight. It's terrible. Or a packet of crisps and a piece of Turkish delight. Or I get a craving for sausages, something greasy. You know, something greasy. Well, I can't be having sausages. I've got coronary artery disease. And I am struggling, and this is not easy. Um, and um, um, and maybe it's a good thing that I'm struggling, because it perhaps keeping me humble. Because perhaps if it was all too easy, I'd start feeling from, oh, it's easy, it's easy to give up, it's easy to give up. You know, it's very easy to feel superior over other people, isn't it? And I think that's one of the dangers with Christianity. It's the horrible things about it. It does get you into that superior mindset where you think you're above everybody else. And I don't think I'm above everybody else now. I just think I'm like everybody else. And it's wonderful to feel part of the human race. I'm no better than anybody else. I'm no worse. I'm struggling. I am struggling with temptation on a daily and on a nightly basis, in exactly the same way as anybody else. And I believe in God. And maybe God doesn't want to make it easy for me. He wants me to struggle. So I become more sympathetic to other people who are struggling. I want you to suffer a bit with this chocolate business so you know what it's like for other people. So you don't go around thinking everything's a piece of cake, because life can be very difficult. It is difficult. And I'm finding it very difficult, and I've got to resist it because I don't want diabetes. So I hope this has been helpful for you and make you rethink our attitudes towards temptation and the temptation of Jesus.